Pack your things. Mom said those exact 4 words while standing in Grandpa's kitchen like she owned it, 1 week after we buried him. My little sister was already upstairs, laughing as she chose her bedroom in the only home I'd ever known. The same home they dumped me at when I was 5 and never came back for. 21 years of silence, 19 birthdays I called her and she never once picked up. Now they showed up with an appraiser talking about market value and family decisions, treating me like an unwanted guest in my own house. They thought I was still that helpless little girl. They had no idea Grandpa had left me one final instruction. And when I followed it, when that study door finally opened, their smiles died instantly. What was waiting inside proved they never really left me behind. They had been choosing to abandon me every single year. But today, the choosing finally stops. My name is Inez Medford, 26 years old. If you've ever been the child your own parents threw away, drop "I was the extra portion" in the comments. I read every single one. Hit like if you want to hear what Grandpa kept behind that door for 19 years. Subscribe. The full story is just beginning. To understand what was inside that box, you have to go back to June of 2005, to a purple suitcase with a broken wheel, and a promise that lasted exactly as long as it took their car to reach the end of Grandpa's driveway. I remember the suitcase better than I remember their faces that day. It was purple, with a cartoon cat on the front pocket, and one of the wheels had snapped off the summer before. So it dragged sideways on the gravel and left a thin, crooked line behind me, like something trying to write a warning. My mother packed it herself. She folded my shirts in that brisk, efficient way she folded everything, and she said, "We're going to Grandpa's. You'll stay with him for the summer. Be good, and before you know it, we'll be back to get you." She said it over her shoulder. She was already looking at the car. My father carried the suitcase to the porch and set it down next to me. My little sister, 7 months old, a person I would not see again for 21 years, was asleep in her car seat in the back. I remember waving. I remember the brake lights at the end of the driveway. I remember they did not slow down at the stop sign. Summer ended. The suitcase stayed packed by the door for 4 months because I believed the promise longer than any adult in that house did. School started in September. That was a problem because a 5-year-old can't just be enrolled by a grandfather with no paperwork. So an envelope arrived in the mail, a notarized form giving Grandpa the right to care for me, signed by both of them, with my mother's neat handwriting on the front. They were willing to sign a paper, buy a stamp, and drive to a post office. They were not willing to drive back for me. Grandpa kept that envelope. I didn't know why then. I know now. The first night I really understood I was staying. He made dinner. Beef stew, thick and brown, the kind he'd made for school kids for 35 years. He ladled out a bowl for himself, a bowl for me, and then a third bowl, which he set at the empty end of the table on a blue enamel plate underneath it, like it was expected company. "Who's that for?" I asked. "Habit," he said, "in case somebody hungry stops by." Nobody stopped by. He rinsed the untouched bowl at the end of the night without a word, and when I asked when Mom and Dad were coming back, he dried his hands very slowly and didn't answer at all. That December, the phone rang on Christmas Eve, the heavy landline in his study. He went in and pulled the door almost shut, and through the gap I heard half of one sentence in a voice I'd never heard him use. Low and tired and hard. "So what exactly do you plan to tell her, Neil?" Then the door clicked all the way closed. He came out and told me my parents were busy and couldn't make it back yet. From that night on, every time he called them, he locked the study door first. My 6th birthday came in May. He handed me the phone and a scrap of paper with my mother's number in his blocky cook's handwriting, and I sat on the porch steps with my bare feet on the boards and dialed. It rang and rang, then a beep. "Mommy, it's me. I'm 6 now. Grandpa made a cake shaped like a duck. I hung up and went inside, proud of myself for remembering the whole message. Through the front window, I saw Grandpa standing in the study. His hand was resting on the receiver of the old phone, like he had just set it down, or was just about to pick it up. I couldn't tell which. It would take me 20 years to find out. The house itself raised me as much as he did. It was a brick single-story on the south side of Louisville, with a vegetable garden out back that Grandpa treated like a second job. He'd cooked in school cafeterias his whole working life, 35 years of feeding other people's children. And when he retired, he simply moved the operation home. He taught me to hold a knife when I was 10, not a toy knife. His knives, from the oak box that lived on the highest shelf in the kitchen, the one with the small brass lock. "Knives aren't dangerous," he said, folding my fingers around the handle. "The wrong hands are." When the lesson was done, the knives went back in the box, and the box went back on the shelf. I asked him once why a knife box needed a lock. He looked at it for a second longer than the question deserved. "Because some things have to wait for the right hands to open them." Then there was the extra portion. It became famous on our street. Neighborhood kids figured out fast that if you showed up at Sherman Medford's back door around dinner time looking hungry, you got fed. No questions. On the blue plate. Some weeks that plate got used 4 nights out of 7. But there were other nights. Quiet ones. Nights when nobody came, and he ladled out that third serving anyway, and set it at the end of the table, and let it go cold while we ate. I watched him watch that bowl sometimes, and I was a kid, so I finally just asked him straight out. "Who's it really for, Grandpa?" He turned off the burner before he answered. "For whoever finally figures out the way home." And there was the study. His desk. His old rotary landline. A wall of spiral notebooks full of recipes in his handwriting. The door was almost never closed, except once a year. I figured out the pattern when I was 13, the way kids figure out the shape of things without understanding them. A few days after my birthday, every single May, he would go into the study, lock the door, make one phone call, and come out with his eyes red. Once I knocked while he was in there. His voice came through the wood, worn thin. "Be right out. It's just one phone call." The brass doorknob was polished smooth from his hand. I tried it once when he was in the garden. Locked. I never tried it again, not until I was 26. 8th grade parent night. A woman at the refreshment table asked him, loudly and kindly, where my mother and father were. I was standing right there. Grandpa turned his hat brim in his hands once and said, "I'm not replacing anyone, ma'am. I'm just here." That night, he shut himself in the study again, off schedule. When he came out, his eyes were red, and he said, "Dust in there." And the extra portion sat at the end of the table and went completely cold, untouched, while neither of us mentioned it. "Dust," he said. It took me 11 more years to learn there was no dust in that room, only paper. Here is what 19 years of birthdays look like when you compress them. Age 12. I practiced in the bathroom mirror first because my voice shook when I talked to her voicemail, and I hated that. Her greeting was bright and busy. "You've reached Sandra. Leave a message. Make it quick." She sounded like someone with a full life. I left my message quick. Age 16. The phone rang twice and then cut straight to voicemail. Twice. You have to press a button to do that. That was the year I learned the difference between a call that isn't answered and a call that is declined. I sat on the porch with my fingernails dug into the edge of the step until the wood left marks in my skin. I didn't tell Grandpa I'd called that year. I told myself it was private. A few days later, the study door was locked anyway, right on schedule. I stood in the hallway staring at it, doing math I couldn't finish. How did he know? Age 17, a girl in my class turned her phone around in the cafeteria and said, "Isn't your last name Medford?" It was my mother's account. 12 years of photos, beach trips, Christmas mornings, pumpkin patches, my father grilling, and in almost every frame, a girl, younger than me, brown-haired, bright-eyed. The caption under the pinned photo said, "Family is everything." Her name was Piper, my sister, the baby from the car seat. She was 12 years old and she had my father's chin, and I scrolled through her entire childhood in 4 minutes flat, and I was not in one single picture, not tagged, not mentioned, not cropped out, never there. They hadn't just left me, they had erased me. I didn't tell Grandpa about the account. And here's the thing I didn't notice until much later. In all those years, he never once said her name to me either. I assumed he didn't know she existed. That was not why. I got through school. I got a partial scholarship to a culinary program in-state, and Grandpa quietly covered the rest out of an old passbook savings account. And when I tried to thank him, he waved it off and taught me his stew instead. The workman's version. Cheap cuts, long hours, no shortcuts. Recipes aren't worth much, he said, tapping my wrist to fix my grip. The hands that have made them 1,000 times, those are worth something. At my graduation, he sat in the family section in an old shirt ironed to a knife's edge. The hall was packed, and he had draped his jacket over the chair beside him, keeping it empty, all afternoon, in a room where people were standing in the back. "Who's the seat for?" I asked him after. "Habit," he said. His whole life was a series of places kept ready for someone. Age 24, May 12th, 2024. I called my mother for the 19th time. 1 ring, then voicemail. 1 ring. Age 25, I sat on the porch on my birthday with the phone in my hand, and for the first time in 19 years, I didn't dial. I turned the phone face down on the boards and let the evening go quiet around me. Later, I told Grandpa, as evenly as I could manage, "I'm done, Grandpa. I've called enough." He looked at me for a long time, longer than the sentence needed. Then he nodded once, got up, went into the study, and closed the door. I thought he was giving me privacy for my feelings. He wasn't. He was writing something down. 3 months later, he collapsed in the kitchen with a wooden spoon still in his hand. Before we go further, comment the age you were when you stopped waiting for someone to call you back. Mine was 25. I want to know I wasn't the only one sitting on that porch. The diagnosis came in August of 2025. Pancreatic cancer, far along. The doctor talked about options in a gentle voice, and Grandpa listened politely the way he listened to salesmen, and then chose home, hospice, and his own kitchen for as long as his legs allowed. "I cooked by the seasons my whole life," he told me when I tried to argue. "My season's here, Inez. Don't pick a fight with the weather." I moved half my life back into my old bedroom. It was the worst possible timing. I was 3 weeks into the tryout that would decide the head chef position at Thistle and Vine, the restaurant I'd bled for since culinary school. And it was not a decision at all. I cooked at the restaurant. I drove south. I cooked for him. He critiqued my seasoning from a kitchen chair with a blanket over his knees, and those were, in a way I can't fully explain, good months. One evening in September, I came in through the back and heard his voice from the study. The door was open a crack. He was on the old landline, and he talked for 20 minutes in a tone I recognized from one Christmas Eve 20 years earlier. Low and level and hard as a cutting board. Then he stood and set the receiver down into its cradle so gently it didn't make a sound. The way you set down something that has died in your hands. "It's done," he said. He came out, tied on his apron, and started dinner like nothing had happened. I asked who he'd called. He salted the pot and said, "Old business." From that night on, he wrote, every single evening in the study, sometimes for an hour, When I asked, he said he was copying out his recipes so they wouldn't be lost. Sherman Medford never needed a recipe written down in his life. They lived in his hands. Through that winter, he got smaller and slower and more deliberate, like a man packing carefully for a trip. He taught me the last of his dishes. He told me stories about my grandmother I'd never heard. And one night, out of nowhere, with the lamplight on his face, he gave me the only apology I ever heard him make. I should have driven down there years ago and dragged the both of them back here by their collars, he said. I was polite too long. That was my mistake, Inez. Being polite. I didn't know what to say, so I held his hand, and we let the radio play. In December, I was refilling his water glass when his phone lit up on the nightstand. The phone was a basic smartphone I'd bought him in 2023, so he could send me pictures of his tomatoes. He typed on it slowly, 2 fingers, and kept his contacts filed like an old man. Initials, no photos. The message on the screen was from someone saved as P. Just the letter. And a period. He was asleep. I stood there with the glass in my hand and every reason in the world to tap that screen. I didn't. His phone, his business, his right. I set the water down and turned off the lamp. I ran through everyone P could be. His pharmacist, his pastor, a poker friend. I ran through every possibility except the right one. In January, he asked me to bring him the knife box. I took it down from the high shelf, and the weight of it surprised me. It always had. A little. Heavier than a box of knives ought to be, and I put it in his lap. He rested both hands flat on the lid, and then he told me 3 things in the order-giving voice of a man who had run kitchens. 1. You don't open this. Not yet. Not even after I'm gone. 2. The day your mother stands in my kitchen and talks to you about money, and that day will come. You go get this box, and you open it right there. In the kitchen. In front of her. Not before, not after, not somewhere private. Right there. 3. He stopped, and his thumb moved once across the brass lock. Whatever happens in that room, you make sure Piper sees what's inside. The floor tilted under me. Grandpa, how do you know her name? He looked at me with an expression I'd only ever seen on him at the stove. Total certainty about something still cooking, still covered, not ready to serve. The house is settled, he said. Don't waste your grief fighting over brick, Inez. Fight over the truth. That was the last long conversation we had. He died in the early morning of February 15th, 2026, in his own bed, in his own house, 79 years old. I found the pot from the night before still on the stove. He'd talked me through the stew from his chair, and I'd ladled it out the way he taught me. 2 portions and a third. The third one sat there that morning, cold on the blue plate. 20 years he made that portion. Nobody ever came for it, and now nobody would make it. They came to the funeral. I want to be fair about this, so I'll say it plainly. They came. They wore black, and my mother cried in a way that photographed well. 5 days after he died, in a church half full of neighbors and old cafeteria ladies and grown men Sherman Medford had fed as boys, Sandra Medford hugged me for the first time in 21 years. She smelled like a stranger's perfume. Her arms were around me, and the whole church could see what a family looked like, and she put her mouth close to my ear and whispered, "We need to talk about the house. Soon." That was her eulogy, delivered privately to an audience of 1. My father worked the reception like a man running for office. He told a group of mourners how much his dad had loved fishing, held forth on it, misty-eyed. Alberta Hobbs, who had lived across the street for 30 years, waited for him to finish and then said, in the flattest voice I've ever heard a Southern woman use, "Sherman got seasick at the duck pond, hun." My father laughed like she was joking and moved to another group. A while later, I stepped into the hallway and found him walking the house alone with his phone out, photographing rooms, the bedrooms, the kitchen. And then, with the flash on, the brass lock on the study door. He photographed every door in that house. Only one of them was locked. And I had the only key. Then there was Piper, 21 years old now, tall, careful, standing at her mother's elbow all afternoon like a well-trained shadow. We hadn't spoken. "What do you say?" But as they were leaving, she peeled away from them and crossed the room to me, and she didn't quite meet my eyes, and her fingers were twisting the strap of her bag around and around, and she asked, "Do you still cook the thing he liked? The stew?" I stared at her. Their car horn sounded outside. My mother's hand on it. Piper flinched, said sorry, and was gone before I found a single word. The thing he liked. How did she know he had a thing he liked? From the window, I watched their rental pull away, and through the back glass I saw Piper turn around in her seat and look at the house. Not a glance. A long look, all the way to the corner. People don't look at a stranger's house like that. 2 days later, my phone rang, and my mother's name was on the screen. I need you to understand what that meant. 19 years I had watched for that name. I had imagined that call at 6, at 10, at 16, at 24. And now here it was. The first call Sandra Medford ever placed to her older daughter. And it was a scheduling call. Friday, 9 a.m. They'd come by the house to start sorting through Dad's things. They'd invited a professional. When I said the word appraiser back to her slowly, she sighed the sigh of a patient woman. "This is grown-up business, Inez. You've just lost your grandfather. Don't turn paperwork into feelings." Her first call in 21 years. And it wasn't for me. It was for the house. So no, I don't count it. I didn't argue. That surprised her. I could hear it in the pause. Grandpa had told me not to fight over Brick, and I was learning that my silence unsettled her more than anything I could have said. That night, I carried the knife box into the study, set it on his desk, and locked the door behind me. Friday, I told the empty room, just like you said. I had 4 days, and I spent them the way he raised me to spend them, checking my ingredients before service. First, I went to see Carol Whitfield, the estate lawyer whose card had been clipped to the folder of papers Grandpa left labeled, in block letters, "When I'm gone." The meeting lasted half an hour. She confirmed what he'd told me in January in his own words. The house was settled. Had been since November. And I was the one with the right to be standing in it. When I asked why he'd never explained the details to me himself, she almost smiled. He said the paperwork was my job. The rest, he was handling personally. His exact words. The rest. Back home, I found something I'd missed on his desk, a package wrapped in butcher paper, tied with twine in the double knot he used for trussing meat. On the front, in handwriting gone unsteady, for P. The letter on his phone in December. The letter on this package. 2 initials, and I still couldn't make myself connect them, because every version of that connection rearranged my entire life. Wednesday night, I nearly broke. I sat at the kitchen table with the knife box in front of me and the brass lock 6 inches from my hand, and I built the case for opening it. What if it was just knives? What if the cancer had reached his mind at the end and the instructions were a dying man's ritual, meaning nothing? What if Friday came and I stood in front of them and opened a box of old steel and they laughed? My thumb was on the lock when I heard him. Really heard him. The way you hear the dead. In the muscle and not the ear. Right hands. Right time. Right order. I took my thumb off the lock, and at that exact moment my phone rang on the table and nearly stopped my pulse. A number I didn't know. Florida area code. I watched it ring out. No voicemail. Nothing. My parents had never once asked for my number, so who in Florida had it? I turned off the light and left the question sitting at the table with the box. Thursday, I cooked. It was the only thing that made sense to do. I made his stew, alone, start to finish, for the first time since he died. And I ruined it. Scorched the base, rushed the sear the way he'd told me 100 times not to, and I stood over the pot and cried harder than I had at the funeral, because grief hits you at the stove, not at the church. Then I washed the pot and started over. The second one came out right. In my notebook, under the recipe, I wrote, less salt. He always seasoned from memory. At 10 that night, my mother texted, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Dress decently. There will be an outsider present. An outsider. In my grandfather's house, the only outsider had never been me. I slept in my old bedroom, under the doorframe where 13 pencil marks climbed the wood, one for every year he'd measured me. I lay there and made myself one promise, and it was a small one, because small promises are the kind you can keep with your hands shaking. I won't argue. I'll ask. At 7:56 the next morning, gravel crunched in the driveway. 2 cars, 3 people, and 1 door, still locked. My mother came through the front door talking. She crossed the living room and pulled open the kitchen curtains. His curtains, the ones he closed against the western sun every afternoon of his life, and said, to no one and to everyone, God, it smells like an old man in here. Behind her came a rumpled man with a leather folio, Gene Loomis, appraiser, who shook my hand with genuine apology in his face and immediately started making notes. Behind him, my father, scanning the room the way you scan a storage unit. And behind him, Piper, who looked at me for one unreadable second before our mother's hand landed between her shoulders. Go on up, sweetheart. Pick whichever room you like. Piper went. And from upstairs, within a minute, came her voice, pitched bright and carrying. Oh my gosh, this room gets the best light. A laugh. Footsteps. Mom, there's a window seat. Every word of it floated down the stairs like a performance played to the back row. My father, meanwhile, had drifted down the hallway. I heard the study doorknob turn once against the lock, then again, harder. Inez. He came back around the corner. Where's the key to that room? I was pouring coffee. Do you take sugar, Dad? He blinked. 21 years, and the first thing his daughter asks him is how he takes his coffee. He said, black. And I handed him the mug, and the key stayed exactly where it was, on a cord around my neck, under my collar. My mother took her cup, sat down at Grandpa's table without being asked, and laid out the morning like a project manager. The market was strong but softening. Spring was the season to list. Loomis would do his walkthrough. They'd get the house cleared within a couple of weeks, and... She paused here, and her voice did something meant to be warm. We're going to be fair about this, Inez. You'll get your share, if everything goes smoothly. If... I asked small questions. I'd promised myself I would, and it turned out to be the easiest thing in the world, because they had 21 years of assumptions saved up and no practice being questioned. When would it list? April, ideally, my mother said. Who decides the price? That's what Jean is for. Dad. I looked at him over my cup. Which room was Grandpa's favorite? He gestured with his mug, confident. The den. He practically lived in that recliner. The den had been my room since 2005. Grandpa's chair was in the kitchen, 6 feet from the stove, where it had been for 20 years. Loomis's pen paused, very slightly, over his pad. My father felt the silence and filled it the way he filled everything, with too much. Look, let's not make this complicated. This house should have been mine 20 years ago anyway. There it was. Not grief, not family. Should have been mine. And right then, I noticed the thing that the room hadn't noticed yet. Upstairs had gone quiet. No laughter, No footsteps. No closet doors. The performance overhead had stopped, and the silence up there had a shape to it, like someone standing very still at the top of the stairs, listening. My mother set her cup down and tapped the table twice with 2 fingers, a gavel coming down. Fine. Let's talk money. The plan was simple, the way she laid it out. Sell within the quarter. Split, appropriately. A word doing heavy lifting. And a decent share for me, contingent. Always contingent, on cooperation. She talked about my grief like it was a scheduling conflict. She used the word practical 4 times. And then she stood, smoothed her slacks, looked around the kitchen with the appraisal already living behind her eyes, and said it. Pack your things, sweetheart, by the weekend. The words landed exactly where they'd been landing since 2005. You said those exact words before, I said. What? June of 2005. In our old kitchen. Pack your things. You folded my shirts. I waited on that porch for 4 months for you to come back. The kitchen held still. Loomis had stopped writing entirely. My mother's jaw shifted. And because she is who she is, she didn't deny it. She corrected the record. That was different, she said. That was for my career. She heard it half a second after everyone else did. For my career. Not for the family, not times were hard, not we had no choice. Loomis studied his notepad like it contained scripture. I set my cup down. I need to get something from Grandpa's study. The hallway was 11 steps long, and it took a year to walk. Behind me, I could feel them arranging themselves. My father drifting after me with his coffee, my mother's heels on the hardwood, and somewhere above, the creak of one stair. I pulled the cord from my collar, and the key turned, and the study opened for the first time since the night before the funeral. It smelled like him. Paper, pipe smoke gone 20 years stale in the walls, the machine oil he used on the pencil sharpener. The rotary phone sat on the desk like a museum piece. Behind me, crowded in the doorway, my parents scanned the room fast and hungry. The desk drawers, the file shelf, looking for the manila envelope, the deed, the will, the thing. I took the knife box off the desk and turned around. For 1 full second, their faces did something remarkable. The smiles they'd worn all morning shut off. Total, involuntary, the fear of paperwork. And then my father saw what I was actually holding, and the relief hit him so hard he laughed out loud. The old knives? He shook his head, grinning at my mother. What's the plan, Inez? Gonna threaten somebody? That was when Piper appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Not coming down. Already there. Standing with both hands wrapped around the banister post like she was holding the house steady, and her eyes weren't on the box. They were on me. Waiting. I carried the box to the kitchen table because those were my instructions. The kitchen in front of her. And I opened the brass lock, and I lifted out the top tray of knives, his good steel gleaming in a bar of morning sun, and the false bottom released. Underneath, filed upright like recipe cards, were papers. Pages torn from spiral notebooks. Folded once, dozens of them, each one labeled in his block handwriting with a year. 2006, 2007, 2008. Every year. Through 2024. 19 of them, and one more at the back, on different paper. What is that? My mother said. It was not a question. It was an objection. I took out the first one. 2006. His handwriting, strong and square. May 12th. She called tonight. I heard her dial from the porch. She's 6. She told the machine about the duck cake. After she went to bed, I called my son. He answered on the second ring. I asked him to call his daughter back. He said now wasn't a good time. I asked when a good time would be. He hung up. Nobody in the kitchen moved. I took out 2015. She's 15, she said into the machine. I just wanted to hear your voice, Mom. I called my son. I read him her words. He said, "Don't make a thing of it, Dad." I have been calling this boy once a year for 10 years. He always answers me. He has never once dialed her number. I keep thinking there is a bottom to this. There is no bottom. My mother came off her chair. "Give me those." She reached, and I stepped back one clean step, the papers against my chest, and something in my face stopped her hand midair. Because here is what those pages meant, and everyone in that kitchen was doing the math at the same speed. There had never been silence. Every single year of my life, on my birthday, my grandfather had picked up that rotary phone in that locked room and called his son. And every single year, my father answered. They talked. And then they chose. With the phone warm in their hands, with my message sitting fresh in their voicemail. Not to press 11 buttons. 19 birthdays. 19 phone calls answered. 19 decisions. They didn't lose track of me.